Mongering and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the Millennial joining me today is Garrick Ross. How's it going, Garrick?
Excellent. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday it is. And of course, our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins, and our producer, Adam Coutura. And so it's Mark and the Millennial, of course, Garrick Ross, and it is Happy Friday. Happy Quarantine Friday.
Happy Mother's Day in
Happy
advance
Mother's
to all the mothers
Day.
out there.
Yeah, absolutely. To all the mothers, Happy Mother's Day. That's coming up in just a couple days, right? Mm-hmm. Or a day or so, more or less.
Yeah, it depends on when you listen to this.
That's right. So what are you getting your mom?
Flowers.
Flower. Okay.
Now I put it out there and she watches this, so now I have to get her flowers.
Oh boy. How about you, Chris?
I'm gonna give her a call, and I don't know. I haven't seen her.
I should have put the bar lower. Should have followed up. I should have followed that like Chris.
Your mom gets flowers. Chris' mom gets a call.
I'll send her flowers.
So this podcast is called Fear Mongering, and of course the dumbest bill in America. So Trump has a new White House press secretary. Her name is McEnany, and she just torches the press.
Yeah.
And basically, of course, the press is constantly doing revisionist history with not just Donald Trump, but with anyone in his administration. Revisionist history in the sense that when did the pandemic begin? When did he know that the coronavirus came to the United States? What did he do? And so forth. But meanwhile, the press itself was reporting all kinds of things that really weren't true back in January and February.
They took a guess. You know, they thought that this wasn't going to be a big deal, like a lot of people did, and they published articles on it, and then now they've been proven to be wrong. But I think rather than, accepting their incorrect stories, they've just kind of passed the blame over to the administration and said, you guys were wrong. Kind of not taking a second to look in the mirror, but,
So Trump gets angry at the press, of course, frequently, and of course his first reaction is to say, you're fake news.
Yes.
But he doesn't refer back to what makes them fake news, such as their previous reporting and how dishonest they were and how they constantly revise history, but at the same time change their writing after the fact. Not so with the new White House press secretary.
No, she is excellent.
She calls them out, including how dishonest their stories were.
Yeah. Whether you agree with somebody politically or not, I think you should at least take a look at how well they articulate themselves and explain their position and are, commanding of the facts. And whether you agree with Kayleigh McEnany or not, she is very good at knowing what she's talking about.
She really is. I mean, she's just, and to prove it, we have a clip. And you have to listen to this clip really carefully because she just torches the press. At least that's what one of the news outlets said. I don't think there's a better word than torches them.
Yeah.
And here is the clip.
Kayleigh, in a previous life, before you were press secretary, you worked for the campaign. And you made a comment, I believe, on Fox, in which you said President Trump will not allow the coronavirus to come to this country. Given what has happened since then, obviously, would you like to take that back?
Well, first, let me note, I was asked a question on Fox Business about the president's travel restrictions. I noted what was the intent behind those travel restrictions, which is we will not see the coronavirus come here. We will not see terrorism come here, referring to an earlier set of travel restrictions. I guess I would turn the question back on the media and ask similar questions. Does Vox want to take back that they proclaim that the coronavirus would not be a deadly pandemic? Does the Washington Post want to take back that they told Americans to get a grip, the flu is bigger than the coronavirus? Does the Washington Post likewise want to take back that our brains are causing us to exaggerate the threat of the coronavirus? Does the New York Times want to take back that fear of the virus may be spreading faster than the virus itself? Does NPR want to take back that the flu was a much bigger threat than the coronavirus? And finally, once again, the Washington Post, would they like to take back that the government should not respond aggressively to the coronavirus? I'll leave you with those questions, and maybe you'll have some answers in a few days.
Oh my gosh, singed. I mean,
Call that a mic drop right there, man.
And why don't they go back to those reporters and say, look, in the old days in the press, what would happen was
They'd correct the story.
They would correct the story. Yeah. Or at a minimum, that reporter was brought in to the editor saying, why didn't you verify this story before you actually came to me? Or the editor was fired for letting the story run without actually making sure that there were substantive verifications of its validity.
Yeah. My favorite part of that clip is, it didn't make it in there, but right after that, as she's walking out of the room, you usually hear the reporters all get up and they start yelling at whoever's at the podium, try to get their last second questions in. And it kind of cuts off as a second, and that person who asked the question is like distraught, and he says, "You were prepared for that question." And it was just, to me, it was shocking, because they just expected her to be up there and have no preparedness, and was just flying off the cuff, and was so surprised that she took the time to actually have this information on hand. And it just shows you, I guess, the level of, freedom that the press kind of takes and how they handle the administration.
Obviously, she wasn't just prepared, but she's incredibly professional.
Yeah.
And she just is able to really do her homework and skewer them, because really, as we all know, this election's about the
Setting the
pandemic.
narrative, yeah.
And now the Democrats are going to change it to, it's about the economy, of course, and
Yes.
about how you responded to the pandemic. And we know this, of course, because that's the kind of stuff that they're running. And in fact, the press doesn't want the government to open up the economy, right?
Yeah.
They don't want the government to open up the economy, because the longer it takes, the worse the economy is going to get. And sadly, many Democrats and the press, of course, I repeat myself, they basically want the economy to crash, which is really hard to believe. It's disgusting. And we have proof of this, because MSNBC's Anderson Cooper is interviewing Mayor Carolyn Goodman. She's an independent mayor, but she is the mayor of Sin City, Las Vegas, excuse me, close enough. So Carolyn Goodman, she's the mayor of Las Vegas. And Anderson Cooper interviews her and basically says, hey, look, why shouldn't there be social distancing and so forth? And are you going to reopen Vegas? And why do you want to reopen Vegas? Isn't that dangerous? It's like he almost doesn't want Vegas to succeed. And she really talks to him like she's his grandmother, and basically getting in his face, wagging her finger. I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. You have to listen to this. We have several clips. Here's the first of several.
You're talking about encouraging hundreds of thousands of people to come to Las Vegas. I get the financial losses people are suffering, which is awful, but you're encouraging, hundreds of thousands of people coming there in casinos, smoking, drinking, touching slot machines, breathing circulated air, and then returning home to states around America and countries around the world. Doesn't that sound like a virus petri dish? How is that
know
safe?
what it sounds like? You're being an alarmist. I'm not. I've lived a long life.
Love
I
it.
grew up in the heart of Manhattan. I know what it's like to be with subways and on buses and
I'm being an
crammed into
alarmist?
elevators. I think you are, by saying what you have just said.
So she basically says, Mayor Carolyn Goodman of Las Vegas is telling Anderson Cooper, you're being an alarmist. How are we ever going to get back to work and get places open if all you're going to say is, as a result of going somewhere and having a good time, you might get sick or you might die? And there are several other clips we have on this. But before we go to those, what do you think about that, Garrick?
What is Anderson Cooper's plan? We can live our life in fear and spend the next however many months sitting inside doing nothing and worried for a lot of people where their next check is going to come and how they're going to pay their bills.
He's still getting paid though, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, in a lot of different ways. Some wish I could be paid. But, at some point we do have to go back to work, and it's just an inevitable part of the economy that I would say a good probably 2.
But he doesn't want people to go back. Really, what he's doing is he's angry that this mayor wants to open up her town, and she's going to defy basically social distancing to get the town back open.
I don't even think she's going to defy social distancing. We don't know what it'll look like yet.
And he asked
it's
her,
too early to say.
So Anderson Cooper asks her in this second clip, don't you believe there should be social distancing and that government knows best? We have this clip, and here it is.
So you don't
I'm the one
believe there
that
should
is
be
saying-
any social distancing? You don't believe that this is
Of course I believe there should be. Of course. I'm a
How do you do that in a
rational-
casino?
That's up to them to figure out. I don't own a casino. I don't know anything
Wait a
about
minute,
building
wait a minute.
casino.
I'm sorry. You're the mayor of Las Vegas, and
Yes.
you want casinos to be open, even though you have no authority, thankfully,
Yes.
over casinos.
No authority,
Yes.
thankfully.
You say open them up, but you have no responsibility about how that would be done
No,
safely?
you're blurring. No, you're blurring.
You said it's
I'm
not your
going
job.
There. I am not a private owner of a hotel. I wish I were. and I would have the cleanest hotel with 6 feet figured out for every human being who comes
So
in there.
It's totally doable because she is saying, the mayor of Las Vegas is saying, look, these are private businesses, very large private businesses, these
with
casinos.
their own unique circumstances.
And they can figure out how to make it work best for them.
Yes. And her office and whoever her health commissioner is and whoever the health commissioner of the state is can all work together to kind of, flush out these plans with each people and each business, but they can be done.
Yeah, but he didn't like that. He didn't like that idea. Anderson Cooper doesn't like the idea that private businesses can be responsible
For themselves.
Because, after all, they own the business.
Yeah.
They can determine when they open and how they open. And people, in turn, can decide whether or not they want to go there.
Yeah.
Because no one's forcing people to walk
You do
into...
not have to go play the slots if you do not want to.
No one's forcing you to. Exactly.
Yeah.
And if there's any business in America, any industry that has tons of money to make sure that you're going to keep partying with it,
Casinos.
it's the casino industry.
Oh, yeah, what a cash cow.
I mean, it's like, here are a pair of gloves when you go play the slots, and here's some spray for your hand sanitizer, and what else can we give you
Wear
to make
your
you more comfortable?
masks,
Here's a mask.
Maybe we'll close off every other, slot machine to give you some ample space. And, is there some games that I'm sure there's going to be a harder time? Yes. Do I know that we're going to all be sitting around at the poker table playing blackjack? I don't know. But, it's up to these entities to figure out a system that works for them and the state and, the city to work with them to ensure compliance.
It's interesting, too. This Carolyn Goodman, the mayor of Las Vegas, she's part of old school Las Vegas, you can tell, but also old school America.
Yeah, her husband was the mayor before her.
Was he?
Is
that right?
10 years, yeah.
She's part of that old school where people basically said, you're an individual, and we believe in individualism. You can make up your own mind.
Yeah.
You can take your own your own risk level.
It's the foundation of Las Vegas.
It is the foundation, absolutely.
Pretty much. Come do
freedom.
what you want, have freedom, spend your money how you'd like, do what you want.
But Anderson hates it, and he says, "Don't you think that you want to kill people?" We have
so-
this final clip of this interview, and you can't believe it. And here it is.
Please, our governor.
I'm focused on what
state-
you're saying, Madam Mayor, and what you're saying doesn't make sense.
Get me to say something. No, that's your opinion of what you think I'm saying, and I am being very clear.
Okay.
I think our governor has a great and a difficult job
but you're
to
saying
do.
competition.
I want the
you want
city
it to
open.
be like the free market. Everybody gets to go into these restaurants, and if it becomes a center for viral infection, that the markets will decide.
Anderson, nope, we weren't.
That's what you said.
We weren't broken when we were closed down, and
You
yet
stand
all
by
of
what
us,
you said.
I think I had it.
You said
believe
let
we
the
need to be
businesses open. Competition will destroy that business if in fact they
Yes.
get evidence they have a disease
Yes.
there. So that
Yes.
should happen. Just let the businesses open. If it becomes a vector for viral infection and those people go back to their states and around the world, so be it.
It's a responsibility of each one of us as a human being and part of the civilized world to know when we're sick. We don't do bad things to people at all, ever.
Oh my gosh, she talked about personal responsibility.
Ayn Rand, please stand up.
Personal responsibility,
Personal
Garrett.
responsibility. The key ingredient to this whole thing is every single one of us needs to be responsible.
She reminded me of Anderson Cooper's grandmother, even though she's the mayor of Las Vegas and they're not related. But like she's putting her finger in his face saying, you need to be personally responsible for what you do, Anderson, and don't expect anyone. I mean, if Bobby jumped off a cliff, would you jump off of a cliff too? I mean, you can just hear it. She's like parenting.
I was very impressed with that. I think she went up there and she knew right away that they were going for the gotcha questions, to try to get some soundbite out of her. And she was like, no, like I thought the best saying she had in the clip was, she goes, Anderson, you just have your opinion on what you're hearing me say, not what I'm saying.
Exactly.
It was really well done. Really
So
great
this podcast is about fear-mongering, and you just heard an entire series of clips about fear-mongering from the press. And in how some politicians are responding, such as the mayor of Las Vegas, that just want to open up and say we all have to be responsible.
Yeah, there are risks. There will be risks.
There are going to be risks moving forward.
But we need to get on with it at some point.
No doubt about it.
Sit around and do nothing and expect this all to just go away, because we're already dealing with now an unprecedented economic situation, if not in almost
Yeah, you can
outright
flatten the curve,
depression.
but you're also going to flatten the heck out of the
I
economy.
mean, the new jobs numbers came out today, and nationally we have
Highest
a 15%
since the Great Depression.
unemployment rate.
Highest since the Great
And that
Depression.
is just people who have been able to be counted.
Absolutely. And so, look, my favorite, talking about fear-mongering, my favorite congressman, my favorite new congressman, or my new favorite here is Dan
America's
Crenshaw.
sweetheart.
Dan Crenshaw, he basically is railing on about how that salon owner in Dallas, Texas, was arrested.
Yeah, that was a travesty.
And then sent to prison, and then since has been
7
released by
days,
the
yep.
governor,
Yeah.
by the really crooked and idiotic judge. He was the one that actually threw her in jail. But Crenshaw is talking about how government is out of control across the country because we have enabled them to have this power and accumulate this power, and now they're completely out of control. And there's no one, in my opinion, in America, other than maybe Trey Gowdy, who can really articulate how we fix this and what is wrong in our society better than Crenshaw.
Yeah. If he is the future of the Republican Party, I'm very, very interested. I mean, he is somebody who has been able to go on late night shows. You remember how Dan Crenshaw really got his national identity? Was SNL took a shot at him, made fun of his eye one day, and rather than, going to Facebook or Twitter and, calling them fake news.
He went on the show.
He went on the show and he threw it right back at him. And he's willing to debate you. And he goes on all the talk shows, regardless of their political affiliation. And he goes on college campuses and he takes hard questions from kids.
And he was self-deprecating about because SNL actually made fun of this war veteran who lost his eye. They made fun of him because he didn't have an eye, and he's like, "Yeah, hey, I only have one eye.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's the way it is.
It's the way it is." You got to really respect this guy. And it's interesting to hear the millennial perspective about him because, from the boomer perspective, I agree, he is the future.
He is what I look for in a politician. Ideas are important.
Plain spoken.
But it's about being able to articulate your ideas and be, agreeable, but as well as being able to have civil discourse, combat ideas that you disagree with, but at the end of the day, respect them. You never feel that, you're arguing ad hominem.
It's true. So we have 2 clips from him, and here's the first of those 2 clips. Here's Dan Crenshaw.
Yeah, these so-called leaders and these so-called judges across the country, arresting moms and dads, and of course she's not the only case. A dad was arrested in Colorado for playing catch with his daughter. A paddleboarder who was paddleboarding alone in the ocean was chased down by police boats in California. Guy in Florida had to be sent to court because he was trying to sell takeout out of his restaurant. This is happening over and over. And these so-called leaders, these so-called judges, they need to take a civics lesson. Okay, these laws will not be respected if they are not respectable laws. People are not dumb. They can understand and they can assess whether a law makes sense, whether it's really based on data and public health. And a lot of these things aren't.
Yep, so there you have it. This is not, a lot of these things are not based on data, and they're certainly not based on the law. And for the most part, we see politicians and even, this judge in Dallas, Texas, they're out of control. But who can better say and articulate what is currently wrong and awry in America than Dan Crenshaw?
Yeah, that's art in motion right there, everybody. But also, I think he's got a lot of great points. Everybody talks about, the steps that we're taking to combat the disease and things like that. But there's so many problems with, allowing these new, I guess you could call them emergency laws or things like that to be taken advantage of. I mean, the examples he gives are, where there's an intended action in response to something that a person's doing, and it almost causes more harm than the person's doing. I mean, for instance, the paddleboard one or the gentleman in Colorado, because I've read articles on these, and
playing ball with his daughter.
In order to remove him from the place where they were doing their, activities, they physically had to have a number of police officers go within this person's personal space, inside the quote-unquote social distance, barrier or whatever you want to call it, to actually remove them. And it's like, they're potentially infecting this person by getting involved in him doing some mundane activity with his child in a field.
But it's the authorities engaging in fear-mongering, and I want everybody to know out there in podcast land that we understand at Mark and the Millennials that many thousands of people have died and are going to continue to die,
and it's terrible,
from this pandemic. But what we're saying here is it's not helpful for government to overstep their bounds and at the same time to arrest people who are willing to take the risk to open up their businesses and the people who are willing to take the risk to go into those businesses. By the way, it's a calculated risk anyway. And here's the thing. People are already going into Walmart. They're already going into Lowe's and Home Depot because they've remained open.
Yeah, these laws are only as effective as people are willing to comply with them. And, you mentioned Home Depot and the grocery store and things. What is the difference between going to Home Depot and going to the grocery store where there's so many people in these confined areas touching things?
Or going to a clothing store.
Yeah,
that all the store sells is clothing, and it's owned by a local retailer, if you will, not a chain, and they're closed down because they're not essential. But then you can walk into Walmart and they got a massive clothing section, and you can buy clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, that's wrong.
It's picking
and
winners
that's
and
what we're
losers.
saying here. There's fear-mongering here, and the fear-mongering is effectively flattening small businesses throughout America, and it's wrong.
Yeah.
And as the mayor of Las Vegas said, we can make up our own minds.
Yeah.
Private businesses can figure it out themselves. And in Ventura County, California, officials have announced a contact tracing program. Think about that, contact tracing, to remove people that have COVID-19 from their homes. Let me say that again.
Where are you putting them?
Ventura County, California. I know I want to say venture like a business venture, but it's Ventura County, California. They're saying that once they engage in a contact tracing program, if they choose to do so, which they may, they can go to your house and say, hey, we're pretty sure that someone in here in your home has has COVID, and so we're going to test them and we're going to remove them from the home and have them go somewhere else to recover. In other words, the government can remove you from your home. I'm sorry, not if you don't want to be removed from your home. It's your home. We have a clip on this. You have to listen to it very carefully to understand where all of this is going and why fear-mongering is so dangerous. And here is the clip.
We will be giving intensive training to these people, identifying and finding contacts. Some of the people we find are going to have trouble being isolated. For instance, if they live in a home where there's only one bathroom and there are 3 or 4 other people living there and those people don't have COVID infection, we're not going to be able to keep the person in that home. Every person who we're isolating, for instance, needs to have their own bathroom. And so we'll be moving people like this into other kinds of housing that we have available.
We will be moving people like this, being people that have COVID, from their homes, moving them from their home to some other place so they can recover. Meanwhile, they're in their home. I mean, that's supposed to be the safest place you can be. At least it was like 2 months ago when the government said, quarantine at home. And that's just, I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous. And it's also really scary because, as we said, this podcast, we're saying fear-mongering. Here is Ventura County, California, using fear-mongering to take so much, your basic civil liberty of being able to stay in your own home.
Yeah, like you said, it is like the word. I thought it was going to be weird that I was going to say it, but it is scary. Like, it is actually scary that at this time in America, that there are policies in place that are effectively things that we couldn't even have dreamed of this country doing, a decade ago or even last year. I mean, we've gone so far towards the extreme in how we're combating this. I mean, to go into somebody's home and forcibly remove them in the name of public safety seems like, one step away from total authoritarianism.
And here's, couldn't agree more. And what's interesting, Garrick, is, and your generation understands this better than anyone else, is cell phones, right? Cell phones have the capability of, as we all know, with GPS tracking. So all the various retailers and the advertisers know where you are, what you've been doing, and what your search history is on your cell phone. And one of the concepts of the health departments across the United States, and what has already been used in China, but for different reasons, nefarious reasons, and I think for nefarious reasons here in the United States, if it is allowed, is using your cell phone to say, you know what, we're going to find out now that you have COVID, and it's a newly developed case, we're going to find out all of the places that you were and find out if and who was near you, so that we can notify them as well. It's like, well, wait a minute. Don't you need my consent to do that? First of all, don't you need my consent to go into my history to find out where I have been? I mean, certainly, I don't mind telling you where I have been, but basically bypassing me and going to my cell phone data and using all this tracing and surveillance. I mean, this is the surveillance state at its worst, because does anyone here in Mark and the Millennials or out there in podcast land think for 1 minute that this is something that won't continue long after the pandemic.
Oh, this is like opening Pandora's box. I mean, both of these things, forcibly removing people as well as using, your personal data to identify who you've interacted with and what you've been doing is, I can't imagine the future applications. I mean, the government already has a history of spying on Americans with the NSA issues in the early 2000s and the late 2000s, and it's just
spying on the Trump administration during the Trump campaign in 2016. They were spying on them then.
Yeah, it's just crazy. It's crazy times, and I'm thankful that that there are people in the legal sector, in the courts and things like that are patriots when it comes to individual liberty and the Constitution, and hopefully we can continue to uphold the values that make America what it is and not abdicate them at the first sign of trouble.
And by the way, millennials are going to have to step up on this because millennials are very willing and able, for some reason, to provide their data. And they're like, I don't really care what they know about me. I'm going to go online. I don't really care about the various security features. For the most part, I don't care. But now we have health departments across America that, not all, but many, that are using the executive orders from governors as a mandate to go and basically know everything about you and where you're going with respect to COVID. And this is just so incredibly dangerous.
I usually don't advocate for European policies, but in the European Union, they actually had passed in the past. Oh, that's a little. Anyways, they had passed in the last couple of years I think it's the acronym is either GDRP or GDPR, and it is an overarching data
privacy bill.
Yeah, data privacy bill that essentially has put.
I think it's GDPR or something like that. Yep.
Yeah, and it's put barriers in place in what private companies as well as the public sector can do with your data and who they can give it to.
But what could they do in the case of an emergency? Because here in the United States, generally speaking, being able to track your phone and where you have been and so forth would probably require a warrant, generally speaking.
Ordinarily it would.
But, can they do this now?
But it's also like the
GDPR
also deals with what kind of data they can collect and where they can store it and how long they can store it. And I think there needs to be an honest conversation in the U.S. legislatively as to what we're accepting when it comes to data.
Here's the problem. Google or Apple, they are the ones that would have to cooperate with the health departments.
Yeah.
So you'd have to have a private company without my consent cooperate with a health department that also didn't have my consent to determine what I've been doing on my cell phone and where I have been. I'm sorry, I'm never going to give my consent to that.
Right.
Never. You want to know where I've been? Come to me in person and ask me.
Yeah.
Okay? Then I'll tell you if it's really a health department issue, if it is. If it's not a health department issue, then kiss off, quite frankly. I'm just sorry.
I think a lot of this, though, also illustrates the difference between your generation and my generation. I mean, I have this conversation with my own dad all the time where, we typically sit on different things. Like, I personally, I see your point, and I also find that often I'm just very indifferent about the whole data landscape where I part of me enjoys that at a moment's notice where I Google one thing and I started getting, recommendations to buy this, that, or the other thing. Whereas, your generation grew up in a time where a lot of these capabilities
didn't exist.
And so you're very skeptical of them naturally and reasonably so, given a lot of things that we've seen as a result. I mean, also part of me thinks it's weird that, I can talk about pizza and then I assure you when I look at my phone after this is done, Mark, there's going to be 7 different ads for pizza places.
Because of retargeting.
Because of targeting. And, it's part of an interesting conversation.
It is. But it's a conversation that is so relevant because if we don't fix this now, with these health departments that are out of control and they think that they can use
not
4G.
Just health departments either. I mean, state governments, police organizations, things like that.
Exactly. And they're using fear-mongering. The title of this podcast, in order to be able to get their way. And they're never going to relinquish this control once they have it.
Yeah.
So get this. New York is charging the Samaritan's Purse, which is the Reverend Billy Graham Jr.'s organization.
Run by his son, Franklin Graham, now.
Yes, run by Franklin Graham, because the Reverend Billy Graham, of course, is deceased. So the Reverend Billy Graham's son has this Samaritan's Purse organization. It's a nonprofit.
All volunteer.
And they went into New York City to build
At New York City's request.
At New York City, to build a hospital.
To build a tent hospital, and I think one of the parks in New York City, and they've treated and helped care for over 300 COVID patients in the last couple of months. And, you know, it's not just Samaritan's Purse that's answered the call. I mean, the governor basically put out a plea for help to any, you know, idling healthcare worker in a state that hasn't been hit by COVID to come out and help everybody here in New York because we desperately need it.
And so the New York State wants to charge these individuals
income tax. It's terrible.
Because of the nexus of them having worked in New York State, the state of New York.
It's a cash grab.
And that's the problem with these blue states. There's never enough cash for them to satisfy their spending.
And they have to go after these people that have just done nothing but be selfless and helpful during arguably one of the most tumultuous times in American history.
And by the way, talk about tumultuous with respect to what New York State is doing to the Samaritan's Purse nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
What New York State is going to, in New York City, what they're going to continue to have is more of an exodus from the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so why? Because for two reasons. One is there was already an exodus because they're a blue state, which is overtaxing the heck out of people.
Yeah.
And people are like, you know what? The cumulative tax burden is out of control. I'm just going to leave. That was already happening prior to the pandemic. But now that the pandemic is underway, especially in New York City, which is, you know, ground central, now residents who loved Manhattan and loved the city of New York are now saying, you know what? It's just too dangerous. Living amongst all these people is no longer something what I want to do. So get this, in the New York Post, there's a stay-at-home mom, Stephanie Ellis. She left her Greenwich Village apartment with her husband, Paul, who's 36-year-old. He's a sales exec for an ad company, and their son, Nolan. And they left in March, just 1 day's notice. That's all they gave. And they basically left Manhattan. They said they loved it, but they went to Stephanie's mother's home in New Jersey. Because, yeah, Jersey, where you're from, right?
Because we're any better down there.
In Marlborough, New Jersey. Where's Marlborough, New Jersey?
It's in the middle of the state.
Middle of the state. Okay, so it's probably, obviously, not probably.
Everything,
it's
though,
a
Mark,
lot less concentrated than New York City.
Yeah, and everything is only an hour away from anywhere in New Jersey anyway, so it's not difficult for them to get up there by taking public transportation.
So Stephanie's a 33-year-old former teacher. Now she's a mom, of course, and she's raising her child. But basically, this couple is saying, you know what? We always thought we'd stay in Manhattan, we'd stay in New York City, but now we're not going back. We're not going back. And so does it help at all when you have the governor or the government of New York State saying to Samaritan's Purse, we want all of your volunteers to pay New York State taxes or New York City taxes, and then meanwhile you've got this exodus that was occurring before the pandemic, and now it is accelerating people in New York City saying, I just want to leave.
And that tax burden that is now being placed on these volunteers, that's in addition to the tax burden that they would have to pay in their home state, wherever they're domiciled and wherever they naturally live. And so it's crippling. And, you know, I've read a couple of articles about it, and they always have a couple of CPAs on who discuss, you know, the implications of a tax policy like this. And these people will have to go through regulatory hurdles and filling out different documents and, you know, sending things to various different places that they didn't have to beforehand. And if you're a volunteer, it's discouraging. Why would I want to go volunteer in New York City if I'm going to have to, you know, be subject to government bureaucracy when it comes to my taxes? And in the threshold...
Why would you ever volunteer is right.
Why would you volunteer? Why would I want to subject myself to that kind of, like, hurdles and paperwork and to be just buried by the city?
Because blue states don't believe in religious organizations who are obviously doing good things. Blue states,
and it's not even just
blue
the
states
religious
don't believe
organizations.
they don't believe in
anybody
volunteerism.
Who volunteers. Yeah,
they believe in statism. They don't believe in
They'd
religion.
rather tax you and then establish some kind of government policy to deal with the issue.
It's really it's so disgusting. And actually, I just want to say this: New York State it's just a fantastic state. New York City is a fantastic city.
Great place to visit.
I do feel awful for the people of New York City, and I feel awful for the people of New York State because they deserve better than to have these really awful politicians that are running that place into the ground.
What irked me so much was reading Cuomo's quotes and why he was going on about this. And for America's sweetheart right now, and America's darling, because the news has been, you know, pushing him forward as the penultimate response to this issue, despite how badly New York City's bungled the whole thing. He said, New York City and New York State is not in the position to hand out subsidies right now. As if somehow by collecting, somehow a volunteer nonprofit organization operating under their own free will in the middle of New York City is being subsidized by the state, despite the fact that they were asked to be there and they aren't taking any money or any payment for the work that they're doing.
From government whatsoever.
At all.
No money from government. No
was
money
so
from the taxpayers. It's just all money that's given to them to run this organization. It is. So we have a funny thing coming up. So the Supreme Court can't meet because, of course, you have a number of people in the Supreme Court, if not most of them,
And
who
for the
are
first time,
elderly.
you can listen to live recordings, not recordings, you can listen to live audio of Supreme Court deliberations. Yep, it's awesome.
The Supreme Court can't actually meet in person, so they're holding their Supreme Court oral arguments via phone session.
Yes.
And so the phone session that was occurring recently with all of the Supreme Court justices present, and apparently even Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg
from the hospital,
participated from Johns Hopkins Hospital, where she's being treated for gallbladder infection after being admitted there. Even she participated.
Yeah.
Which is pretty, good for her. I'm glad I'm glad, and I wish her well. I really do. But here's the thing. During the oral arguments, there was a toilet flushing.
Oh boy.
So, I'm not sure if it was Ruth.
On mute.
I'm not sure if it was Ruth Bader in Johns Hopkins, but someone, go ahead and say that. The millennial thing. You guys always do this, but you are smart enough to mute the phone when you're in the bathroom.
Yeah, it is. The mute button is something that they're all still figuring out. I'm a bit of a legal junkie, so I've been watching all the hearings, and it's comical to see the technical difficulties on display. I mean, I think it's Kagan still hasn't figured out how to turn the mute button off, where somebody hasn't figured out how to turn it on. Every time Roberts goes to tell her that it's her turn to ask a question, 30 seconds will go by where apparently she's talking, but she's muted and she can't hear it. And she always goes, sorry, Chief, I did it again.
I can't tell you how many times I've been on a conference call with 10 or 15 people, and the person leading the conference call says 10 times throughout the conference call, would you please, whoever it is, please mute your phone.
God. It's
because you can hear them moving it around their mouth and breathing inside of the phone and so forth.
Or they're arguing with their kids. Their kids are running around.
Or the dog's barking.
Yeah.
Well, in this particular case, it was a toilet flushing during the Supreme Court oral arguments. We have a clip on this, believe it or not, and here it is.
Going to be saying, hey, call your congressman and change these laws that apply to banks. And what the FCC has said is that when the subject matter of the call ranges to the topic, then the call is transformed. And it's a call that would have been allowed and it's no longer allowed. And so I think...
Hello, Ruth. Ruth.
I don't know, Mark. If I was a Supreme Court lawyer...
Mom, I'm out of toilet paper.
If I was a Supreme Court lawyer and I was in the middle of a legal argument there, I don't know how I would possibly recover from that. I'd be so in awe of what just happened. I'd call it a career, Mark. I've seen it all.
That's just so awesome. So way to go, Supreme Court, to bring some humor into our day. I mean, it just shows you that...
No wonder they haven't done this before. They can't figure it out.
Exactly. And it's not like it was a video conference as far as I can tell. I think it was just on the phone.
We know who the culprit was. Take the camera into the bathroom with them. Oh, terrible.
So speaking of terrible, Joe Biden doubles down on his apparently new favorite word. We're not going to tell you what the word is because we're hoping that
for itself.
We're going to let it speak for it. Good. We're going to let it speak for itself. Do you out there in podcast land know what the word is? By the way, this is not the first time. This is the second time he has used this word.
On TV.
Yes, you can look up in the dictionary and see if there are other meanings of the word, but let's face it. The general public in America, when you hear the word,
got one association.
You only think one thing, and it's not a word that you're going to use out there.
I wouldn't say it in front of Mom.
No, exactly right. You just it's not a word that you're going to probably
Honestly,
say.
Mark, the more I fumble with this word in my mind, the more it's just a weird word. It just sounds terrible.
Right. It's also awkward too because it's not the kind of word you would even use anyway if that was something that
you were describing.
But nonetheless, this is what Joe Biden has decided to do. What is the word out there in podcast land? Do you know what it is? Well, here's the clip, and let's see if you know.
This pandemic The pandemic is that the president has no intercourse whatsoever with the rest of the world.
He caught
dealing
himself.
with these things. We led, like Barack Obama led in the
He led on the intercourse.
in the pandemic that occurred when we were in office. It was kept in Africa. We organized the world. We put things together.
Apparently, Garrick, Barack Obama led on the intercourse during the pandemic the last time.
Oh God, inserting himself into the conversation.
Certainly in Africa, he was doing that. Because that's where, of course, the last pandemic was
Did you hear him
supposed to have
stutter in there
started,
a
just to
little
say. I just want to make sure, yeah.
Did you hear him stutter in there a little bit? He said the word, and then he was like, "Oh man," he kind of like fumbled a little bit. It's like I did it again. Terrible timing, Biden, especially all these.
Why don't they have
against him.
cue cards? Since he's got to do all these interviews from home anyway. Why doesn't he have cue cards? Like, his aide should be there with cue cards. Like, don't say intercourse. I mean, just
don't say it as he says it out loud. Oh,
exactly.
Man. I can't wait for the debates with him and Trump. It's gonna be a riot. I mean, him just going out and saying dumb things like that, and then who knows how Trump's gonna try and roast him on the spot about it.
Oh, Trump's gonna totally say, and he's gonna look. This guy is losing his mind. There's no doubt about it.
Right before your eyes.
No reasonable elected official or politician who's running for office, no reasonably intelligent person, I'm just saying reasonably intelligent, would use that word and not just be skewered by the press. But the press just isn't even touching it.
No.
I mean, obviously it shows you how fake they are. I mean, don't you agree? I mean, what am I missing?
Yeah, I don't know how much more Joe Biden gaffes we have to take before we have an honest conversation about whether Joe really should be doing this or not.
Yeah, is this the guy that we really want?
It's amazing how 2 or 3 years has really changed him. I mean, even at the end of his
It's
vice
affected his mind.
presidency, he was
quality of
still
his
very
mind.
articulate. I mean, I can remember the Paul Ryan debates, just how despite how I fundamentally disagreed with everything he ever said, he was still very good at debating.
And Gavin Newsom, of course, the governor of California, he's going to throw a headliner fundraiser, but during this pandemic,
Governor Ken doll.
which is the Ken doll, yeah, and the other Ken doll. But Gavin Newsom has a fundraiser for Joe Biden, and the interesting thing is that this will be the first time there will be a fundraiser where it's kind of like a cash mob, where everybody's kind of online and they're video chatting and they're talking to one another because you can't be in the same room, because there's a pandemic going on, and
It's an interesting
they're having difficulty
fundraiser.
raising money.
I was going to say, it's an interesting fundraiser because from my understanding, half the appeal of donors is that they cut a fat check to your super PAC, and then they get to have dinner with you in a wine cave.
They
for
get
a
to see
night.
you.
But
Yeah, like Pete Buttigieg,
like Pete
right?
Buttigieg and all the wine caves.
Meet Pete in his wine cave.
That's
We might want to go
interesting.
back to that last clip, but no, we won't do that.
Okay then.
But Gavin Newsom is doing that, and it actually dwarfs Gavin Newsom, because there was a time just recently when he was actually looking a little bit like a statesman, because he was saying, look how well we've done in California, and I've worked really closely with the President of the United States.
They did a
even
good
though-
job for such a big and densely populated state. I mean, most of the population lives in the 6 major metropolitan areas.
But don't you think he loses a lot of credibility when he does silly things like support Joe Biden? I mean, I don't know. I just think sometimes too many people
paying his dues to the establishment, because that guy wants to run for president one
There's
day.
no doubt. And
No
you're right about
doubt.
him being a Ken doll. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, he is very much poll tested and poll driven, and he's always doing the good optics, and every time there's a disaster, you see him running around, whatever city in his aviators and his nice slick suit. He certainly knows how to hog the spotlight.
Yeah, he does. He looks the part, He's been groomed for this part his
Oh, yeah.
entire life.
I mean, I think his dad was either the governor or something like that a while ago. His family is a prominent family.
Yeah, I'm sure they're extremely well off, too.
He was bred to be, the next big thing.
So get this, podcast listeners. We have a very special story about how the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, is that what it stands for?
Ah, yes, with the $1,200 checks and things.
So you get a $1,200 check, and it's kind of lands in your account, or it's mailed to you.
Yes.
Right? That's how it works, and that was part of the stimulus to make sure that you had money to buy the basics, like food and shelter and clothing.
$1,200 up front and then $600 extra a week.
$1,200 is for most people not going to be enough to pay for their rent and their food and so forth.
No.
So at least they have some money to pay for food and other things. But here's the thing. when you give out mass checks like this, they're
Some
probably
people fall through the cracks.
there's massive fraud. And I have a very personal story about this, the payroll protection program. I have an update on it. So my wife just received a check in the mail. My wife did. And it was for $1,200. And on the check, and I just want you guys to look at the check. Maybe you can put the check above my finger here. It's like, here we go. So here's the check. Look at this check. It is for $1,200. And it was to my wife. And it says to Miriam Bugach, which is my wife's mother, care of her representative, which is my wife's name. And then it had after my wife's mother's name, Miriam Bugach, in caps, DECD, if I'm correct, which means deceased. But it had 5 or 6 spaces after my wife's mother's last name, meaning that it was pretty obvious that the DECD wasn't another name, it was meant deceased in the computer system. Well, my mother-in-law passed away in April of 2019. That's last April, not April of 2020, but April of 2019. So a little bit over a year ago.
Means she probably would have filed her 18 tax return, right?
So no, actually, she hadn't filed yet.
Okay, interesting.
But that misses the point that we're making here. It says that she's deceased.
Yeah, on the check. Even.
IRS. I mean, American Treasury. I mean, Mnuchin. I mean, I'm just saying. You sent a $1,200 check to my wife, who's her representative.
Who knows what she could have done with it?
And you even put on the check that she was dead. I mean, what the heck?
Yeah.
How many other dead people have received checks and their family members received them, put them in the bank? I just want everybody to know out there, my wife is not depositing the check. She called, our accountant, and the accountant says, look, this is happening a lot. Obviously, don't deposit the check. We'll have to figure out who to send the check back to because, I'm sure there's probably not even a place you can send the check where someone can go,
going to take the check?
Oh, wow, look at this check. They sent it back. I'm going to give them extra credit. Of course, that's not how the government works,
No, they want their money and they want it now.
I want my money and I want it now. But I just thought, folks out there in podcast land, here's a great thing to learn from this experience. Government was never set up and was never supposed to be
these ginormous undertakings.
Exactly. Government was not supposed to be doing all of this. I'm not saying that we don't need government to help prop up the economy and help people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there's massive fraud. And
there's lots of ways it can go wrong and be abused.
And here's a great example, right? How many people actually received checks
that were deceased got a check? That's one example of countless ones that through my job I've seen. Small business owners, truly small business owners, somebody who owns a plumbing company in his town of 1,000 people and he's got 3 employees and he needs a loan to keep the place open.
He needs real money.
He can't get it.
And the thing is I just can't reiterate this enough. And maybe you can put this up one more time, the check, because I have my finger right there. Put it right above my finger. It says DECD. She's not here. She's deceased.
Dead.
And yet you and your computer system still sent the check out? What the heck?
It's simple. It could have run just a little bit of code and said, scan for deceased and then delete. But,
Exactly. But apparently the IRS is really good, at least it was during the Obama administration, of making sure that nonprofits that were conservative organizations didn't get their nonprofit status. Denying them nonprofit status through the federal code. But they're really bad at apparently sending checks out. I'm not really sure what's happening there.
I am so amazed that they even were searching for people who were deceased and saw that they were deceased and said, let's put it on the check.
Let's inject the money into the economy anyway, because someone's going to get it and spend it.
They probably were like, guys, if we send it to all the deceased people, we can say we sent 34 million checks as opposed to 32 and 34. So it's so much better. Something stupid like that. I bet you there's some weirdly stupid rationale behind it and why it happened.
But yeah, kudos to my mother-in-law because I'm sure she's looking down on us right now and laughing really hard, saying the government is stupid because she had a thick French accent because she was born and raised in Switzerland. So anyway, my wife will appreciate that when she listens to the podcast. So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. Yes, it's the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Assistant Producer Christopher Hopkins?
Yes, we do.
And here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And the dumbest bill in America is a $100 fine for walking the wrong way.
Oh boy.
A $100 fine for walking the wrong Way in
The
Beverly,
revolution starts now, Mark.
in Beverly, Massachusetts, a town in the greater Boston, Massachusetts area, Beverly, Massachusetts, has decided that they're going to use their emergency powers under, the healthcare code and the emergency powers of the state. The police department's going to say, hey, you're walking the wrong way. So therefore, we're going to give you a $100 citation because we told you not to walk the wrong way. And by the way, this is the state with MIT, Harvard, and Boston College, and many, many, many other wonderful colleges and universities. I think there are a lot of smart people there, and they can figure out, can't they social distance without the police saying, we're going to give you a $100 fine?
Yeah, I mean, hey, I have, what is it? The policy behind it is like you got to walk in the designated one way and then back in the other.
You have to walk against traffic one way, and that way you're going in the correct direction. But doesn't that defy the common sense with respect to not which direction you're supposed to walk in, but who cares which direction you walk in? Just
stay away from
and
people.
Stay away from people in quarantine. By the way, I thought that's what masks were supposed to accomplish anyway.
Well, that's what they told us after they told us that that's not what that accomplished.
Yeah,
so,
clearly
who
it's
knows?
not true. Clearly it's not true. Maybe it helps a little bit, but it doesn't help a lot. So we have a very short clip on this. This is the Beverly, Massachusetts Police Department, basically, getting all happy about how much power they have.
Look what we did.
And by the way, when you look at this video and watch this video and listen to it, they have those big signs, the signs that are electrified and they run off of a generator, and the sign lights up and it says one-way walkway. Just like you'd see on a street like construction ahead, but they have these right there on the sidewalks or next to them to make sure that you're smart enough to be able to follow their directions.
You gotta wonder how many people are actually out and walking around right now that this is like a major problem that they identified.
And the picture that they showed, they said, well, they have tons of people on the sidewalks. I really didn't see that many in the picture, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, there were a lot. Then wouldn't you maybe wait a few minutes and just stay off to the side or walk in the street, make sure there are no cars in the street, and stay away that way?
Yeah.
No. You're going to get a $100 fine.
When I go for a run or I go walking or something, or I'm in the store and somebody gets if I know that I'm going to encounter somebody, I either walk into the street and walk around them, or they do the same themselves. It's pretty common sense here, people. It's not hard.
Here's the clip, by the way. It's a short clip. You're going to really enjoy it. Here it is.
Walking, go this way if you're going that way, and if you're going that way, you're going on that side.
Okay. Just monitoring the people out there, we noticed that there was just a tremendous amount of traffic where people are walking into each other. We had to make changes. We had to come up with ideas. It keeps people the opportunity to stay that 6-foot distance.
So there you go. I'm sorry. These are police officers that really are taking themselves way too seriously. Because at the beginning, the first police officer says to the lady, well, you got to walk that way when you're going that way, and when you're going that way, you got to walk that way. And she's like, oh, okay, police officer. I couldn't figure that out. I mean, in any way, why do I need you to tell me which direction I can walk in? Because it's a free country, and I'm supposed to social distance anyway.
I like how they explained it like this was a ginormous undertaking for the department. They were like, we had a problem, and we had to come up with this very clever solution. We needed to think outside the box. We need to innovate, Mark. I mean, our podcast stresses innovation, and these people really hit it right on the head. I mean, I don't know how we would have figured anything out. I don't know how we would have done life without this.
Wasn't it The Simpsons that always had the Irish police officer? They had the accent. I thought it was The Simpsons. Maybe it was another particular cartoon that was out there. But these guys, of course, have got the thick Bostonian accent. The cops do when they're talking.
Yeah.
And I can just see the guy walks up to you and he's like, "Dang, that'll be $100. Here's a fine. What's your name? What's your address? I told you the sign says right there it's lit up. You can only walk against traffic. Don't do it again, or the next time it's going to be another $100 fine."
The things we worry about.
And this is really, by the way, it's the basis of this whole podcast, which is fear-mongering, right? It's fear-mongering, but it's also trying to treat us like we're idiots, that we can't figure out how to protect ourselves.
Like the American people are stupid.
And by the way, let me just say this. Millennials, podcast land people, every time you go outside, don't you take a risk anyway? I don't mean just during pandemic times, but every time you jump in the car,
life is a
you
giant
risk
risk,
that you're going to get an accident. Every time you walk on a sidewalk, you risk that a dog might get loose and bite you. I don't know. Obviously, this is an invisible enemy, but we're told masks and social distancing are sufficient. And therefore, if you practice that, when you walk on a sidewalk, irrespective of which way you go on the sidewalk, it should be just fine. Final thoughts on that, on the millennial perspective.
Mark, I think we should go test it out. We should go see what happens if we walk the wrong way.
We should, Mark and Millennials, we should take a field trip to Beverly, Massachusetts and intentionally walk in the opposite direction.
I just want to see what happens. And we got to record it, Mark. Hey, if you
is
think
that $100 fine enforceable?
If you think that the outrage over them with that lady, opening her beauty salon in Texas was unreal, just wait, Mark. Just wait until they get somebody.
So, by the way, you get the $100 fine, and is it enforceable if you don't live in Boston? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, who are you?
Say the cop, no, give me another one, because I'm not going to pay it because I don't live here. It's not enforceable.
Yeah, well, come find me.
Exactly. And what if he says, please identify yourself, show me your license and registration for walking?
For walking? Yeah, I mean, if you don't carry your license on you, what are they going to do?
So that is the dumbest bill in America. It's a $100 fine.
100
for walking the wrong way in Beverly, Massachusetts.
Hey, Mark, they got to make up the revenue deficit somehow.
Yes, they do.
One ticket at a time.
And that's the dumbest bill in America. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher, and thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross, and of course, our producer, Adam Katora, and our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Please check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.